Rachel Emery sat on the edge of her twin mattress, staring at the eviction notice crumpled in her lap like it might somehow change if she just looked long enough. It didn't. 30 days. That's all the landlord gave her after raising the rent for the third time in a year. The apartment that had once been barely affordable was now out of reach, just like everything else. Outside, Portland's drizzle painted the windows with streaks of gray, and inside, the air felt heavier than usual. Jonah coughed in the next room, a sharp, rattling cough. Rachel didn't need to check to know the humidifier was empty again, and they were out of distilled water. She rose, stepped barefoot into the tiny kitchenette, and opened the cupboard. 2 packets of instant oatmeal, half a jar of peanut butter, and a single bottle of Jonah's medication remained. She closed it quietly, as if silence would make the shelves fuller. The microwave's clock blinked 2:14 a.m. She should be sleeping. She had a 5-hour shift at the coffee shop in the morning, followed by her second job cleaning floors at the clinic. But sleep never came easy lately, not with the weight of eviction, overdue bills, and a son battling an immune disease on her shoulders. Her phone buzzed. She glanced down. A push notification from a local auction site she didn't remember subscribing to. Tiny cabin on forest land. Starting bid $900. Elder Pines County auction. Rachel blinked. A cabin? For $900? She clicked the link, expecting a scam or a typo, but it seemed legitimate. The listing was bare bones. Unoccupied since 1989. Significant repairs needed. Sold as is. Property includes 2 acres of forest land. No inspections allowed. Buyer assumes all risks. There were 3 grainy photos. A weather-beaten cabin with a sagging porch, vines swallowing the windows, and a gravel path barely visible through the overgrowth. It looked haunted, but Rachel couldn't stop staring at it. Not because it was beautiful. It wasn't. But because it was something no one could take from her. A place that couldn't be pulled out from under them with a notice tacked to the door. A last-ditch, desperate idea. Yes, but an idea with roots, with ground, with walls. She clicked through to the auction instructions. It was happening the next morning at 9 a.m., in person, cash or certified check only. Her breath caught. She had exactly $902.35 in her savings account. Every single dollar she'd scraped together over the last year. Emergency funds, gas money, birthday tips, all of it. For a long moment, she sat frozen in the kitchen chair, the screen casting ghostlight on her face. Every rational part of her screamed, "Don't do this." She hadn't seen the place. She didn't know if the roof leaked or if the floor was caving in, or if bears had made it their home. But then Jonah coughed again, harder this time, and Rachel remembered something her grandmother used to say. Sometimes the only way out is through the fire. She picked up the phone and made a decision. At 8:45 a.m., Rachel stood on the courthouse steps in Elder Pines, a modest mountain town 2 hours from Portland, with an envelope of $900 in her purse and sweat prickling beneath her coat. Her blue interview blazer was too tight now, and the heels she wore pinched with every step. But she looked put together. She had to. The auction room was a low-ceilinged chamber filled with people who didn't look like they'd missed meals. Developers, flippers, men with manicured beards and women in boots that cost more than Rachel's car. She found a seat in the back and made herself invisible. The auctioneer spoke quickly, rhythmically. Bids flew for warehouses, townhouses, parcels of land, everything sold for thousands, tens of thousands. Her cabin came up an hour in. Lot 172, parcel 44, county held foreclosure, known locally as the Westwood Cabin. Starting bid, $900. Silence. No hands raised. "Do I have $900? The auctioneer asked again. Rachel lifted her hand. It trembled. $900 from the woman in the back. "Do I have $950? No response. "Going once? going twice, sold, to the woman in the blue coat for $900. The gavel cracked like a thunderclap. Rachel blinked. She had expected a battle, a second bidder, a trick. But no one had wanted it. No one but her. The clerk handed her a manila folder and a single rusted key. "That's the old Westwood place, isn't it?" she murmured. Rachel glanced up. "I don't know. It just said cabin." The clerk hesitated, then smiled politely. "It's got a colorful history. Been empty a long time. Good luck." As Rachel walked out of the building, the paper felt too light in her hands. She had just spent everything she had on a property she had never seen. She didn't even know if it had a working toilet. But something deeper stirred within her, a thrum of possibility. Not joy, not relief, but potential. She opened her phone and called the school. "Hi, this is Rachel Emery. I need to pick up my son early today." "Yes, it's a family matter." A new chapter had begun, and even if the ink bled or the pages tore, she would write it herself. The winding road to Elder Pines was narrower than Rachel expected, flanked by moss-laced trees and blanketed in morning mist. Jonah sat in the passenger seat, hugging his inhaler, his brow furrowed. "So, where exactly are we going?" he asked, his voice cautious. Rachel hesitated. "To see something that might be ours." "Might?" She forced a smile. "Okay, it is ours. I bought it. A house." Jonah blinked. "With what money?" "All of it," she admitted. $900. He stared at her. "You bought a house for less than a used PlayStation?" "It's more like a cabin. And, well, it needs work." Jonah leaned back slowly, quiet for a long moment. "Is this like when you said the car only needed a new battery, and then we found out it needed a transmission?" Rachel laughed, despite everything. "Possibly worse." The GPS beeped. "Turn right in 300 feet." The paved road ended and gravel took over. Trees closed in around them, older than memory. They passed a rusted mailbox with a faded number barely visible. 1139. Rachel braked slowly. There it was, the Westwood cabin. It looked like something out of a forgotten photograph. Weathered, pine siding, roof half collapsed on one end, a porch sagging like tired shoulders. Vines coiled up the walls like veins, and the forest had begun reclaiming the yard. One of the windows was shattered, and a bird fluttered out from the broken frame as they parked. Jonah let out a long breath. "Cool. Haunted cabin. Love that. For us." Rachel shut off the engine and turned to him. "Look, it's not perfect, but it's ours. We'll make it work." He didn't answer. They stepped out into a silence so deep it felt like holding breath. The air smelled like wet leaves, old wood, and something more elusive, like memory itself. Rachel approached the door and inserted the rusted key. It stuck. She jiggled it until it gave with a metallic groan. The door creaked open to reveal darkness. Inside, dust floated through shafts of gray light. A wooden table sat covered in a blanket of pine needles and mouse droppings. The air was stale, laced with the earthy tang of mold. She turned on her phone's flashlight. The beam swept across aged furniture, a toppled rocking chair, a broken lamp, a torn curtain fluttering in the breeze from a cracked window. The cabin had been left exactly as it was the day someone walked out and never returned. Jonah stepped inside behind her, pulling his hoodie over his nose. "It smells like wet ghosts." Rachel chuckled, but even she felt a shiver. There was something about the stillness, too complete, too intentional. They explored cautiously. The main room opened into a small kitchen with rusted appliances and a tiled countertop cracked like ice. Cabinets hung open, some empty, some still holding forgotten cans and yellowed recipes. A calendar on the wall read, October 1987. A short hallway led to 2 small bedrooms and a bathroom. In one of the rooms, a child's bed frame still stood, its mattress missing, a faded mobile of stars dangling overhead. The other room had a desk, beneath a boarded-up window, a bookshelf, and an old coat still hanging from a nail on the wall. "Someone just left," Jonah whispered. "Like, ran out." Rachel nodded slowly. She felt it too. That eerie sense of interruption, like life, had paused, not ended. They returned to the living room. Rachel opened the back door, revealing a narrow porch and a dense patch of trees beyond. As she stepped out, her foot landed on something hollow. She knelt, brushing away moss. A loose board. Curious, she pulled it up. Beneath it was a shallow space, filled with rotting leaves, and something more. A tin box, tarnished and cold. Rachel hesitated, then lifted it out. "What is it?" Jonah asked, moving closer. She opened it. Inside, an old leather-bound notebook, a faded Polaroid, and a rusted key with a small tag that read, "Lab." Rachel picked up the photo. It showed a woman standing in front of the cabin. She was tall, with eggy, caramel skin and striking features, one eye bright blue, the other a deep brown. A cascade of wild curls framed her face. She wore a lab coat and a soft smile, scrawled on the bottom of the photo. L. West, March 1986. Rachel stared at it. This must be her. "Who?" Jonah asked. "The woman who lived here before, Dr. Leora West." "Doctor? She lived here?" Rachel opened the notebook. Inside, elegant cursive filled the pages. Notes, sketches of plants, chemical structures, journal entries. The first line read, "This place chose me. I hope it chooses the next one wisely." A chill ran through Rachel. She turned the page. Compound 7 shows increased immune cell regulation, possible breakthrough for genetic immunodeficiency. Her heart thudded. Jonah leaned over her shoulder. "What does that mean?" Rachel swallowed. "I'm not sure yet, but it looks like research. Important research." She closed the notebook carefully and looked at the key. "Lab. Do you see any outbuildings?" she asked Jonah, scanning the eye. "Tree line." He pointed toward the woods. "There's something metal behind those trees, like a shed, but different." Rachel pocketed the key. The air had shifted. She felt it, not fear, but the awakening of something old, forgotten, waiting. She glanced back at the cabin. No, this place wasn't haunted. It was guarded. That night, Rachel barely slept. She lay on the old mattress they'd dragged into the cleaner of the 2 bedrooms, her arm draped protectively over Jonah, listening to every creak the cabin made. The forest, outside, whispered against the siding, branches scratching like fingernails against the windows. But it wasn't just the usual noises of a forgotten house settling into itself. Something about this place didn't rest. Rachel's thoughts circled like vultures. The notebook she'd found, Dr. Leora West's journal, was sitting on the table beside her. She had read the first few pages 3 times now. The entries were part science log, part personal confession, written in a voice that was precise, poetic, and unsettlingly lonely. Leora had lived here alone, but not without purpose. Her words crackled with urgency. They want the formula, not the healing. They want control, not cures. I told them no. Now I wait. Rachel didn't know who they were yet, but she could guess. When Jonah finally fell asleep, his breathing light and rhythmic, she sat up and pulled the journal into her lap again. One entry caught her eye. It had been dated just 3 weeks before the woman vanished. Compound 7 is showing increased regulatory impact on IL-2 receptor sites. If my theory holds, this may be a breakthrough treatment for GID disorders with minimal side effects. This is no longer academic. This is personal. Rachel froze. GID. Genetic immunodeficiency disorder. Jonah's exact diagnosis. Her hands trembled as she turned the page. There were chemical diagrams she couldn't fully interpret, though her training in lab work gave her some context. But what struck her more than the science was Leora's conviction. She wasn't just working in isolation. She was racing against time. And then, she had disappeared. In the morning, the fog lifted reluctantly. The forest was still damp and heavy with silence. Rachel heated water on the portable camping stove she'd brought from their old apartment. They had no electricity yet, no plumbing, but Jonah was excited for oatmeal like it was a feast. She watched him eat, a pang of both guilt and gratitude settling in her chest. His color looked better. He'd slept through the night. No coughing. Was it just the clean air out here, or something more? As he rinsed his spoon with bottled water, he paused. Mom, did you hear someone walking last night? Rachel's blood cooled. No, she said carefully. Why? Jonah looked down. I thought I heard footsteps, and I saw something, maybe a flashlight, outside the window. But it could have been a dream. Rachel didn't answer right away. Instead, she stood and walked to the back door, opening it slowly. The porch boards groaned beneath her weight. She scanned the woods. Nothing, but the feeling remained. Later that morning, they followed Jonah's earlier discovery, a half-buried metal structure about 30 yards into the woods. It wasn't a shed. It was a bunker, squat and square, with a rusted steel door and no windows. Rachel brushed aside brambles and cleared dirt from the handle. The old key from the box clicked into the lock with startling ease. Inside, the air was stale but dry. A single narrow room unfolded before them. Metal shelves lined with jars of preserved herbs, labeled test tubes, faded notebooks stacked in crates. In the center, a workbench with an old microscope. The room was cold and lifeless, yet strangely intact, Rachel whispered as she stepped in. She built this to last. Jonah trailed behind her, cautious but curious. Is this her lab? He asked. Rachel nodded slowly. It has to be. She opened one of the notebooks, carefully turning the fragile pages. More notes, this time with test data, patient observations, recorded progress. At the bottom of one page, a chilling phrase was underlined twice. The compound works. They cannot have it. Suddenly, a loud crack echoed outside. Rachel jumped. Jonah gasped. They rushed to the door, peering into the woods. Nothing but trees. But something, or someone, was out there. Rachel locked the door behind them and pulled Jonah close as they walked back toward the cabin. Her heart pounded. The woods no longer felt empty. Something had shifted. Back at the house, she called Ben Holloway. She'd met him briefly at the auction, a man in his 50s with silvering hair and a quiet, capable way of moving. He lived in town, off-grid mostly, and offered handyman work for those who don't ask too many questions. Rachel figured he might be the kind of person who could help without blinking twice at the strange. Ben arrived that afternoon in Matimanasi, a dusty pickup, toolbox rattling in the back. He surveyed the property, stepping through the cabin with a practiced eye. Place has good bones, he said. Old-school craftsmanship. Foundations better than most new builds, but someone's definitely been here since it was abandoned. Rachel looked up sharply. How do you know? He pointed to the doorframe. Scratches in the wood. New. Like someone's picked the lock recently. And see this? He lifted a clump of disturbed dirt by the steps. Boot prints. Heavy. Not yours, she swallowed. Why would someone come back now, after all these years? Ben shrugged. Depends what they left behind. He paused, then added, You're not in trouble, are you? Rachel thought about lying, but she didn't. Instead, she handed him the journal. Ben read in silence for several minutes, nodding slowly. Then he looked at her, something hard and certain in his expression. "Whatever you found here," he said, "someone wanted it buried, and if they know you found it, they won't stay away for long." That night, after Jonah was asleep, Rachel sat on the porch wrapped in a blanket, listening to the forest breathe. Somewhere behind the trees, an owl called. She opened the journal one more time, letting it fall to a random page. It read, "I built this place for healing, for truth. If they silence me, let someone else carry the torch. The cabin will choose her." Rachel looked up toward the stars. It had been a gamble, one last desperate gamble. But now it felt like fate had chosen her back. The next morning began with silence, but not the peaceful kind. Rachel opened the cabin door with her coffee mug in hand and stopped cold. The morning sun revealed something she hadn't noticed the night before. Boot prints. Deep, fresh ones. They circled the cabin, weaving around the porch steps, cutting across the patch of flattened weeds near the back. Not hers, not Jonah's. Someone had been here while they slept. She turned back inside and locked the door quietly, heart ticking faster. Jonah was still asleep, curled in a tight ball, his breathing soft and steady. She tiptoed to the kitchen and grabbed her phone. Ben answered on the second ring. "They were here," she whispered. "I'll be there in 20, he said. Ben arrived with a crowbar strapped behind his seat and a small toolbox in hand. He knelt in the dirt beside the cabin steps, studying the tracks like a hunter reading sign. "These are at least size 11, he muttered. "Work boots, heavy tread. Recent, maybe within 6 hours. They didn't just walk through. They circled." "Why?" Rachel asked, arms folded tight across her chest. Ben stood slowly. "Because they're watching." He inspected the well next. Rachel had shown him the pump system connected to a water tank behind the cabin. Rudimentary, but working. After a few minutes of silence, Ben called her over. "Smell this." She leaned down, cautious. The water smelled like metal, but something sharper too. A chemical tang, like paint thinner or old gasoline. Ben unscrewed a valve and drained a bit into a glass jar. The liquid had a slight greenish tint. "Someone poisoned your water," he said bluntly. "Low dose. Could have made Jonah sick without killing him. Makes it look like allergies or cabin mold." Rachel's blood ran cold. Why would anyone do that? Ben gave her a long look. "You said this research is valuable, right? Enough to make people angry?" Rachel nodded slowly. "More than angry. It could change everything." They spent the rest of the day outside. Rachel didn't want to be indoors anymore. Jonah, blissfully unaware of the threat, explored the backyard with a stick he insisted was a wizard staff, while Ben installed makeshift motion sensors from his truck. Rachel sat with Leora's journal on her lap, flipping through pages with new urgency. Halfway through the book, she found an entry labeled simply, "The Visitor." "He came again today. Second time this month. Same offer. More money, more insistence. Said the world needs my work, that I'm being selfish." When I refused, his voice changed. Cold. Not business anymore. Control. I saw the glint in his eye. Ownership. He said, "Don't be foolish, Doctor. West, everyone has a price." I told him mine was already paid. In blood, in sleepless nights, in conscience. He didn't like that. Rachel exhaled slowly. "So it wasn't just corporate interest," she murmured. Ben leaned over from where he was installing a camera above the door. "What do you mean?" She wasn't paranoid. Rachel said. She was being hunted. That night, the offer came. Rachel had just tucked Jonah in with his stuffed wolf, his guardian, he called it, and stepped outside to breathe. A silver sedan pulled up the driveway, tires crunching on gravel. She instinctively stepped back behind the porch post. The car stopped. The headlights turned off. A tall woman stepped out. Mid-40s, sleek pantsuit, heels sinking slightly into the soft earth. She carried a leather folder in one hand, a smile sharpened to a blade. "Ms. Emery?" the woman called. "I hope I'm not intruding." Rachel didn't respond. "I'm Delilah Langston, Vice President of Strategic Acquisitions at Novagen Biotech." Rachel's throat dried. "Langston? Victor Langston's daughter? I believe you've come into possession of some property that holds unique value to our company," Delilah continued. "We'd like to make you an offer." Rachel stepped into the open, hands clenched at her sides. "This property isn't for sale." Delilah's smile didn't waver. "We're prepared to offer you $500,000, cash. No questions asked. As is." Rachel laughed under her breath. "No questions asked?" Delilah tilted her head. "Look, I understand how tempting it is to chase ghosts, but what's buried here is better left that way. You're a single mother. Imagine what that money could do for you, for your son." Rachel's face hardened. "I already imagined it, and I still said no." Delilah's smile cooled. "Then I suggest you reconsider, quickly." Without another word, she returned to her car. The engine started, and the vehicle reversed out of the drive without haste. Ben emerged from the side of the cabin, crowbar in hand, face grim. "I heard all of it." "She's bluffing," Rachel muttered. Ben looked at her. "No, she's warning." Rachel couldn't sleep. The moon was sharp in the sky, casting long shadows across the floorboards. The forest no longer felt sacred. It felt watched. She sat by the window with the journal in her lap, reading Leora's last entries. They were fragmented, rushed. A woman losing time, and faith in safety. "If you're reading this, it means I've lost the war. But maybe not the battle. They'll come. They'll offer more. Then they'll take." Rachel closed the book and pressed her forehead to the cool window glass. She didn't have the luxury of walking away. Jonah stirred in his sleep, mumbling something unintelligible. Then, loud enough to make her freeze, he whispered, "She's outside." Rachel turned. Jonah's eyes were closed. "Asking me to find what she left behind," he mumbled. Rachel felt every hair on her arms rise. He turned over and went still again. Outside, a soft breeze moved through the trees. But something else moved. Too, a presence. Not cruel, but not resting. Rachel had never believed in ghosts. But by the time morning lit the sky over elder pines, she was no longer sure what she didn't believe. Jonah remembered nothing of what he'd said in his sleep. When Rachel asked if he'd had any dreams, he shrugged, spooning oatmeal into his mouth. "Just trees," he muttered. "Maybe a shadow. Can we go exploring again today?" She nodded slowly. "Later, after I check something." When Ben arrived mid-morning, Rachel led him straight to the back of the cabin, beyond the rusted rain barrel and the line of cedar trees, where the grass gave way to wild underbrush. She had followed Jonah's direction from the night before. He'd pointed vaguely toward the woods, saying, "She wants us to look where the trees bend toward the sun." It sounded like nonsense then. Now she wasn't so sure. They reached a patch of overgrown ground where the vegetation grew in tangled patterns. Wild yet strangely intentional. Ben crouched and brushed back the weeds. "Huh," he said. "That's not random." Rachel dropped beside him. "What do you mean?" "These rows," he said, drawing a line in the dirt. They're planted, not by chance. Somebody laid this out years ago. He stood, turned slowly, and pointed toward a cluster of raised earth mounds arranged in a curved arc. You're standing in an herbal garden, or what used to be one. Rachel looked around, her eyes adjusting to the pattern. Lavender, gone wild. Mint and thyme spilling into each other. And at the center, a gnarled tree with white bark and crimson-tipped leaves. That's not native, Ben said, frowning. No, Rachel whispered. That's what Leora called the Redshine hybrid. She cultivated it, said it had rare properties. From the journal? Rachel nodded. It's the plant she built her compound around. Ben stepped carefully toward the tree. At its base, the soil looked disturbed, softer than the rest. He pulled a small spade from his back pocket and began digging. Less than a foot down, his metal trowel hit something solid. Rachel knelt beside him, brushing away dirt to reveal the edge of a rusted tin box, larger than the first one they'd found. She pried it open. Inside, sealed in wax paper and protected by cloth, were dozens of neatly bound pages, a cassette tape labeled April 1987, and a photograph. Leora, standing in this very garden, smiling, holding a basket of herbs. But it wasn't the serene smile from the earlier photos. This time her expression was wary. Behind her, half hidden in the frame, stood a man in a dark suit, sunglasses on despite the overcast sky. Rachel's breath caught. Ben studied the photo. That him? I think so, she said. Victor Langston. Beneath the documents lay another sealed envelope. On the front, written in steady script, If they silence me, you must speak. LW. They returned to the cabin and spread the contents out on the table. Rachel carefully unfolded the pages. Diagrams, patient data, trial, results. She recognized terms from her own training: immune modulation, cytokine balance, DNA expression mapping. This is beyond groundbreaking, she whispered. She wasn't just experimenting. She had it mapped, documented, verified. Ben inserted the cassette into a small battery-powered player he'd brought from his truck. Leora's voice came through, soft and clear. They say they'll pay. They say they'll patent. But they'll bury it. Just like they buried every cure that doesn't turn profit. I didn't come here to sell my soul. I came to give something back. If I disappear, if this work disappears with me, then no one will remember why I fought. The tape clicked off. Rachel sat frozen. Ben leaned back in his chair. She knew. And she knew they'd come. Rachel looked toward the window, toward the place where the garden waited beneath decades of decay. She didn't just grow medicine, she said softly. She planted truth, and now we've found it. That evening, a knock came at the door. Rachel froze, her body taut with instinctive fear. Ben stepped beside her, silent as a shadow, hand resting on the baseball bat he'd positioned near the door earlier. But it was only Agnes Thorne. The elderly neighbor stood with a basket of fresh bread and a face full of quiet steel. I heard you. Stirred up the Westwood ghosts, she said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. Agnes looked around the room like someone reacquainting herself with an old friend. Her eyes lingered on the journal spread open on the table, then on the cassette player. I was here the night she vanished, she said finally. The lights in her lab were still on. Her truck was in the drive, but no one ever saw her again. Rachel leaned forward. Did she say anything to you? About being threatened? Agnes hesitated. She said something was coming, something she wouldn't run from. She told me, if I disappear, Agnes, make sure the right hands find what I left. She turned toward Rachel. I think those hands are yours. Later that night, after Jonah had fallen asleep and Agnes had gone home, Rachel sat outside with Ben, watching the last light bleed out of the trees. "I keep thinking this will stop feeling unreal," she said. "But it doesn't." Ben stared toward the garden. "That's because it is real. Too real. And people like Victor Langston? They're betting you won't have the stomach to finish what she started." Rachel didn't answer right away. Then she said, "He sent someone. A woman. Offered me $500,000 to walk away." Ben turned to look at her. "And you're still here." Rachel nodded. He nodded back. "Then you're stronger than you. Think." A breeze moved through the trees. Somewhere far off, an owl called into the dark. Rachel looked back at the cabin, its windows reflecting moonlight. For the first time, it didn't feel abandoned. It felt alive, watching, waiting. Rachel woke to the sound of coughing, dry, rasping, sharp. She bolted upright. "Jonah," she called, already crossing the room. He was sitting up in bed, clutching his chest, gasping for air. His face was pale, eyes wide and panicked. Rachel grabbed his inhaler from the nightstand and placed it in his hands. He took 2 quick puffs. Nothing. He tried again. Still nothing. Rachel's blood ran cold. She yanked the inhaler from his hands, unscrewed the canister, and peered inside. Empty. No, not empty. Water. Her hands trembled. Someone had tampered with it. "Get in the truck," she told him, voice steady only through sheer force of will. "We're going now." They arrived at Ben's cabin 10 minutes later. He lived just outside the Elder Pines boundary line, in a 2-story structure he'd built with his own hands, off-grid, secure, and guarded by a pair of motion-activated lights and a loyal German shepherd named Remy. Ben took one look at Jonah's wheezing, pale form and ushered them inside without a word. Rachel explained what had happened as she paced the living room. Her words came fast and sharp, fury building. With each syllable, when she told him about the inhaler, Ben's expression darkened. "That's not just intimidation anymore," he said. "That's attempted murder." Rachel nodded. "They're trying to scare us away. But this was aimed at Jonah." She ran a hand through her hair. "I didn't sign up for a war, Ben. I just wanted a place to live." Ben looked at her. "You found more than a place. You found a secret someone's been trying to bury for over 30 years. That afternoon, Ben inspected Rachel's truck before she made any plans to leave. He lay on the gravel driveway beneath the vehicle for several long minutes. When he crawled out, his face was grim. "Brake lines have been cut," he said. "Clean slice. Professional." Rachel's knees almost gave out. "If you'd driven down the hill this morning..." She didn't need him to finish. Ben stood and wiped his hands on a rag. "We need help, not just each other. The local sheriff won't touch this, but someone higher might." Rachel hesitated. "You think it's time for the FBI?" "Past time." That evening, Rachel called Dr. Mara Ellington, her former supervisor from her time working in medical research before she had Jonah. Dr. Ellington had always been more than a boss. She'd been a mentor, someone who believed in Rachel's mind, even when Rachel didn't. Rachel had sent her copies of Leora's work days ago. Now her voice was tight with urgency. "Mara, someone sabotaged Jonah's inhaler, our truck. This isn't just intimidation anymore." There was a pause. "Rachel," Mara said, "I believe you. And I've already contacted a journalist I trust, Catherine Weiland, Pulitzer finalist. If this story gets out, it gives us protection." Rachel rubbed her eyes. "I'm not trying to be a hero. I just don't want Jonah to die." "You won't be alone," Mara said firmly. "But you need to secure those originals. Digital backups, off-site storage. Hide them in 3 places and don't tell anyone where. And the FBI? I'll connect you." That night, as the rain tapped against the windows of Ben's cabin, and Jonah finally drifted into shallow, exhausted sleep, Rachel sat in the kitchen sorting through everything. Leora's journal, the scientific data, the cassette recordings, the photographs, and the tape of Langston's threats. She opened the sealed envelope marked, "If they silence me, you must speak." Inside was a letter. "If this finds its way to you, I am likely already gone. They came to buy, and when I refused, they came to claim. You must be careful. The cabin was only the first vault. The second is where my story ends. Look where the apple trees lean. There, beneath the roots, I've left the final piece. Not just science, proof of what was done, of who took me. They will come for you, just as they came for me. But the truth will bloom again if you plant it in the right soil." Rachel set the letter down with shaking fingers. Apple trees. Jonah had mentioned apple trees once before. He said there were some out in the thicket behind the garden. Rachel looked at the clock. It was 2:07 a.m. She grabbed a flashlight. Ben insisted on going with her. Remy followed at their heels. The night was heavy, the rain light but constant. The beam of Rachel's flashlight cut through the mist as they moved through the garden, past the herb beds and the red shine tree. "Here," she said, pointing. There, just beyond the edge of the garden, stood a small grove of crooked apple trees, their trunks twisted like dancers, leaning slightly east. Jonah had been right. They walked to the largest one, and at its base, the soil looked slightly darker, looser. Ben began to dig. 2 feet down, the shovel hit something solid. A weatherproof container. Inside, another cassette tape, a second journal, and a bundle of documents marked Confidential Novagen. Internal. 1987. But more chilling than any of it was the final item. An envelope containing a series of surveillance photographs. Leora, her lab, her home, and in one, Victor Langston, clearly visible, standing outside her cabin, shouting. Rachel's breath caught in her throat. They had it. Proof. The next morning, Rachel placed 3 phone calls. One to Mara, one to the FBI, and one to Catherine. "Weiland, the journalist, are you ready to blow this open?" Rachel asked her. On the other end of the line, the woman's voice was steady and low. "I've been waiting my whole career for something like this." The FBI agents arrived 2 days later in an unmarked black SUV, credentials discreet but unmistakable. A man and a woman, both in their 40s, with that clipped, precise calm Rachel recognized from years ago when she'd worked on pharmaceutical compliance cases. They didn't waste time with pleasantries. "We've reviewed the files your colleague Dr. Ellington submitted," said Agent Liu. "If they're genuine, what you've uncovered has the potential to implicate not just a private company, but multiple regulatory failures." Rachel nodded, her hands folded tightly in her lap. "There's more." She led them to Ben's cabin, where the originals were kept in a locked metal chest. Inside, both of Leora's journals, the cassette recordings, the Novagen internal memos, and the surveillance photos. The agent scanned each item with growing interest. "This photo alone," Agent Ramirez said, tapping the image of Victor Langston outside Leora's cabin, "puts him at the scene the week she disappeared. That matters." Rachel didn't say what she was thinking, that Langston hadn't just come to threaten her, he'd come to silence her. The next day, Catherine Weiland arrived. She stepped out of her rental car in hiking boots and a charcoal trench coat, her silver-streaked hair pulled back in a braid. She looked less like a reporter and more like a war correspondent, which, in a way, she was. "I've interviewed whistleblowers," she said, as Rachel handed her a folder. But never someone who inherited a mystery. Catherine spent the day reviewing the evidence, walking the property, and asking careful, unintrusive questions. She listened more than she spoke. She asked Rachel to walk her through the garden, the cabin, and the lab. When they reached the apple, Trees, Catherine stood in silence for a long time. She buried the truth in the ground, she finally murmured, and waited for someone brave enough to dig. That evening, Rachel stood in the Westwood cabin alone for the first time in days. Jonah was safe with Ben and Remy. The FBI had taken digital copies of everything, with plans to coordinate a deeper investigation with the Department of Justice. Catherine was filing her report that night, set to go live across national platforms in less than 48 hours. Still, Rachel couldn't shake the sense of unease. Something about the house felt still again, but not peaceful. Not anymore. She moved through the rooms slowly. Leora's voice still echoed in her head. If they silence me, you must speak. When she reached the study, she paused. The wall beside the bookshelf had always seemed odd. Too smooth, too flat. She pressed her palm against the plaster and knocked. Hollow. She found a screwdriver and carefully pried off the molding at the base. A panel loosened. Behind it, a small hidden alcove. Inside, wrapped in a red silk scarf, was one final envelope. Rachel pulled it out with trembling hands. The handwriting was unmistakably Leora's. To the one, brave or desperate enough to call this place home. You have found what they buried, what they killed for. But the story isn't finished until justice is spoken aloud, for all to hear. This research is not property. It is promise. You must be louder than their money, braver than their silence, and kinder than their greed. Rachel swallowed hard. If they come for you, as they came for me, remember, you are not alone. This place will remember who it chose. Speak. By the time Catherine left the next morning, she had a title for her story. The scientist they tried to erase, a mother, a cabin, and the cure buried in the woods. Are you ready for the firestorm? She asked Rachel before getting into her car. No, Rachel admitted, but I'm ready to stop hiding. Catherine smiled. Good, because once this hits, hiding won't be an option. The story went live that night. By morning, it had been shared over 4 million times. The reaction was instant. National headlines followed. Mother uncovers suppressed cure. Whistleblower from the grave. The billion-dollar secret buried in a forest. Rachel's phone didn't stop ringing. Some messages were supportive. Some venomous. Ben stood watch outside the cabin, armed and grim. Jonah watched everything with wide eyes. Are we safe now? He asked. Rachel hesitated. We're not alone anymore, she said. That makes us safer. Then, the backlash began. Novagen's public relations office issued a statement calling the story sensationalized and misleading, denying all allegations. Within hours, journalists began investigating the company's long history of failed trials, abandoned treatments, and whistleblower lawsuits. Within days, Victor Langston stepped down as CEO, but that wasn't enough. A week later, the FBI contacted Rachel with news. We sent a team to the coordinates you provided, Agent Liu said over the phone. We found skeletal remains. Preliminary dental matches confirm what you already suspected. Dr. Leora West. Rachel felt something in her chest loosen, then tighten. Found. At last, Agent Liu continued. There's evidence of trauma, blunt, force to the skull. This is no longer a missing persons case. It's homicide. Rachel closed her eyes. Thank you, she whispered. A vigil was held that weekend in Elder Pines. Dozens gathered in the clearing behind the cabin near the garden Leora had once planted. Jonah helped place a wreath of lavender and red shine blossoms near the apple tree. Rachel stood before the crowd and read a passage from Leora's journal. To heal is not to erase pain, but to transform it, to name it, to grow something better. In its place. The crowd was silent. Then, slowly, they began to clap, not loud, but firm. Sure. That night, as Rachel prepared for bed, Jonah stood by the window. She's not sad anymore, he said quietly. Rachel turned. Who? Jonah looked at her with eyes wiser than his years. The woman in the garden. Rachel walked to him, pulled him close. She would have liked you, she whispered. I know, he said. She told me. 6 months later, the cabin no one wanted was no longer silent. The peeling paint was gone, replaced by rich cedar siding that gleamed under the late summer sun. The porch had been rebuilt, strong and straight. The windows no longer gaped open like wounds. They held light, warmth, and the sound of laughter from inside. Rachel stood at the top of the front steps, watching as Jonah gave a group of visiting students a tour of the garden. His voice was proud, animated, explaining how redshine helped regulate immune function, how lavender calmed the nervous system, and how every plant Leora had once nurtured was now alive again, thriving under careful hands. And this one's her favorite, Jonah said, pointing to a mint bush. Dr. West used it for headaches. Mom drinks it with tea every morning. Rachel smiled, her chest full. From a desperate gamble in the dead of winter, they had arrived here, whole, grounded, safe, and never alone. The Josephine Mercer Foundation, named with intention after Leora's birth name, finally honored, was now officially registered and fully funded. Ethical pharmaceutical companies had come forward after the FBI's indictments, eager to license the compound Leora had created. But Rachel had made one thing clear from the start. This wouldn't be another drug owned by billionaires and rationed by price tags. The treatment was patented in Leora's name. Its production was required by contract to remain affordable and accessible. It had already begun clinical trials under independent oversight. Jonah had received his first regulated dose a month ago. He hadn't had an attack since. Victor Langston was found guilty on charges of obstruction of justice, corporate conspiracy, and second-degree murder. The courtroom had gone silent when the cassette tape was played. The one with his voice, sharp and arrogant, threatening Leora just days before she vanished. He'd aged in prison. The once impeccable CEO now hunched, hollow-eyed. But Rachel felt no triumph watching the footage, just a strange stillness. Justice wasn't revenge, it was remembering. Catherine Weiland's follow-up article had won her a National Journalism Award. She declined the spotlight, insisting the story belonged to someone else. You didn't just dig up a cure, she'd said to Rachel one evening on the porch. You uncovered a buried future, and you gave it breath. Ben had never left. He still came by every day, still left tools lying around in case Rachel ever needed to fix something, even when she didn't. His quiet presence had become part of the cabin, sturdy, reliable, unspoken. One night in late July, as the fireflies danced above the garden, Rachel turned to him under the stars. You think we're allowed to want something for ourselves? She asked softly. Ben glanced at her, his hand brushing against hers. I think we're already building it. And when he kissed her, gentle, deliberate, honest, Rachel didn't feel surprised. She just felt home. On the 1-year anniversary of the auction, a ceremony was held in the meadow behind the cabin. Dozens came. Scientists, activists, reporters, neighbors, students, families of patients with immune disorders. Agnes Thorne, now something of a local legend herself, gave the opening speech. I watched her disappear, she said, voice trembling. And I lived for 30 years knowing no one believed what happened here. But now, the land speaks again. Because someone listened. When Rachel took the microphone, she spoke not as a mother or a whistleblower or even a survivor. She spoke As a keeper of legacy, I bought this cabin because I was desperate, she said. I didn't know what I was walking into. I just wanted a roof over my son's head. I thought I was taking a gamble. But this place, it didn't take from me. It gave me everything. She paused, looking out at the garden where Jonah now stood beside the redshine tree, holding a fresh bloom. It gave me her. That evening, after everyone had gone, Rachel sat in what had once been Leora's lab, now restored and open to visiting researchers. The shelves were filled with catalogued notes, labeled compounds, and framed photographs of Leora smiling in the sun. Her spirit felt etched into the walls. Rachel placed a fresh page into her journal, the first entry in what would become a new volume. She left a garden. I planted roots, healed bones. We grew forward, because someone had to. She closed the book and turned out the lights. But before leaving, she glanced once more at the window. There, just for a moment, she saw a flicker of movement. A silhouette. Familiar. Watching. Not haunting. Guarding. Rachel smiled. Later that night, as she tucked Jonah into bed, he looked up sleepily and whispered, "Do you think she knows what we've done?" Rachel kissed his forehead. I think she knew, before we started. In the deep quiet of the Oregon woods, the cabin stood, no longer forgotten. It had been broken, abandoned, feared. Now it had become a sanctuary, a living truth, a place where the past finally bloomed into healing, where the woman the world tried to erase had finally and completely been remembered. If this story moved you, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel for more true tales of resilience, justice, and unexpected hope. And tap the notification bell so you never miss the next story that might just change the way you see the world.